there's growing evidence that the Trump administration may be hiding more than just bad press, and it stretches far beyond the Epstein story. Critics argue that they've failed to address the gun violence crisis, instead normalizing political intimidation and turning national tragedies into political theater. Rather than tackling real causes, some in power are choosing to scapegoat marginalized groups, particularly trans people, for an act they had nothing to do with. Even more troubling, reports suggest that related material has recently been deleted, raising serious questions about whether there's an effort to erase the record. In this video, we'll break down the latest reporting and what it means for accountability. But first, let's look at a Republican voice who broke ranks and directly called out MAGA on this issue. Senator Tom Tillis.
Within 24 hours of Mr. Kirk's shooting, we had the guy that does the podcast for the War Room and another guy who's denied the Sandy Hook shootings say we're at war. Now, how on earth, and I do believe it's a smaller number, but it's a number that has an influence. How on earth are we de-escalating the situation? And with the tensions as high as they were last week, with going out and saying we're at war. I'm not asking you to respond to this question. I'm just saying that there are people out here on our side of the aisle that still need to look in the mirror. Even if you agree that it's a lower number, bad is bad no matter how many numbers they are. And that kind of rhetoric and that kind of mobilization makes your job more difficult and puts us in a position where we're not being as productive as you want the FBI and state and local law enforcement to be.
I refuse to accept the idea that Democrats, who have consistently spoken out and acted against both political violence and gun violence, should be the ones pressured to apologize or constantly restate their condemnation. That only distracts from real conversations and real solutions. Meanwhile, Republican leaders have escalated their attacks on marginalized communities simply for existing. This moment is about targeting trans people. Donald Trump knows that his past attempts to scapegoat Black and brown communities, or to stir fear about immigrants, are losing traction. So now he's chosen another vulnerable group, exploiting tragedy for political gain. What he refuses to acknowledge is how his own words, his own rhetoric, his mocking tone, and the behavior he encourages have all fueled this climate. And it's not just Trump. The broader MAGA media ecosystem plays the same game. Just listen when Scott Jennings' own words are reflected back at him.
I just want to read the words of someone who I think is very wise in the wake of 2019 and the killing in El Paso. He wrote, "We have to stop blaming the politicians we loathe for the vile actions of the deranged, evil people who commit mass shootings." He went on to say, but here's the thing. We should not, the rush to rage against Trump and the predictive punditry that he will inevitably fail to unite the country seems counterproductive to people who want a meaningful policy outcome. All politicians have a responsibility to ratchet down their own rhetoric and to ask their supporters to stand down as well. And that man was Scott Jennings. And so what I would say about that is those were wise words then, and they should be wise words now.
I don't disagree with any of that.
These officials refuse to acknowledge their role in building a culture where political violence has become normalized, where the public is left numb and even expects it. They show no interest in changing that reality. Instead, they exploit it, turning every tragedy into a chance to shift blame. That's the hallmark of this administration, not prevention, but manipulation. There's been no real effort to address the causes of the next shooting, as leadership failures remain unaccounted for and Republican lawmakers continue to block meaningful action. The pattern is clear. Rather than taking responsibility, they deflect, and that was made even more obvious by Donald Trump's latest move, which involved deleting critical material. DOJ quietly scrubs study on far-right attacks after Kirk's shooting. The Department of Justice quietly deleted a study showing that far-right attacks outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violence extremism in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. A June 2024 study on domestic extremism by the National Institute of Justice, a research agency under the DOJ's Office of Justice Programs, began noting that militant nationalistic white supremacist violent extremism has increased in the United States. In fact, The number of right-wing attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violence extremism. Reads, since 1990, far-right extremists have committed far more ideologically motivated homicides than far-left or radical Islamist extremists. The paper goes on to state that no single profile accurately captures the characteristics of the individuals who commit extremists and hate crimes, citing data from 2 NIJJ databases. The study was on the OGOJP website until around Friday when sharpied social media users noticed that it had been replaced with an error message stating the request page could not be found. The deletion was first reported by Jason Palladino. The entire 13-page study can be accessed through an archive version of the webpage. The paper generated renewed interest after Kirk, a conservative activist who pushed far-right values through his popular podcast, was shot in Utah. The assassination immediately set off a firestorm of finger-pointing between liberals and conservatives who accused each other of sowing political violence. Donald Trump was quick to hold radical left lunatics responsible for Kirk's killing, telling reporters that individuals and groups on the left have been placed under investigation. Donald Trump is working to shift blame for violence onto the left, targeting liberals, progressives, and organizations broadly connected to them, because he refuses to face the fact that most political violence in the United States comes from far-right extremists. That violence is fueled both by inflammatory rhetoric and by the easy access to firearms. Instead of acknowledging this reality, his allies attempt to bury it and redirect attention toward marginalized communities, especially trans people. But the information available shows that while Republicans tried to frame the trans community, the shooter's alleged partner, who is believed to be trans, had no knowledge of the crime, was devastated when they learned of it, and fully cooperated with law enforcement. Twisting this tragedy into an attack on trans people is dishonest and cruel, but it's exactly the type of distraction strategy Trump and his allies use to divide the country and cover deeper failures. Republicans are not treating this as a moment of mourning. They're treating it as political theater. The hypocrisy is undeniable. On the very same day as the Charlie Kirk shooting, another act of violence occurred at the hands of the same type of extremist who has carried out similar attacks time and again. But that incident received no spotlight, no response from Republican leaders, and no commentary from figures like J.D. Vance, simply because it didn't fit their agenda. Meanwhile, this administration has delivered nothing for working people, while the wealthiest few continue to benefit. And, as Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez emphasized, that reality deserves far more attention than it has been given.
Now, do you know how many jobs have been threatened or lost due to the Trump administration's closures of clean energy projects in the last 6 months or so, the first half of this year?
I'm not aware of any such analysis.
91,000. Trump administration and Department of Energy policies have cost Americans 91,000 jobs nationwide in rollbacks on efficiency. And, you know, these large numbers are statistics. They're hard to, I think, people to understand when they show up on a white paper. But in Colorado's 8th district, Amprius Technologies canceled plans to construct a $190 million battery plant in Brighton, Colorado. In that same district, actually, another company, VSK Energy, canceled plans due to the Trump administration, canceled their plans to build solar panels, and they scratched a $250 million investment and up to 900 jobs in that same district. In Georgia 12, an EV plant was canceled due to the Trump administration and DOE's freezing of the EV charging program. Registered Georgia has a population of 157 people. They lost out on 166 jobs. They lost more jobs than they have people in that town because of the cancellation and war on renewable energy and clean energy here. In that same district, a copper foil manufacturing plant went bankrupt as a result of these rollbacks, and Augusta, Georgia lost out on 350 jobs. And I mean, the list goes on. In South Carolina, 250 jobs when a construction of an EV plant in Florence was halted due to DOE's freezing of funds. I mean, we could go on. In Michigan 10th, 167 jobs were lost after $50 million worth of investment. These are all freezes in renewable and clean energy construction and development projects. This is an industry that has been a source of jobs and growth. This administration, the Trump administration, is destroying the American economy, destroying American jobs. 91,000 jobs in this sector alone. I have one simple question. In these towns and areas, what is the DOE's plan to replace those jobs in those affected areas?
I'll say this is beyond the scope of what I'm prepared to testify to today. I'd be happy to take the question for the record in regard to the analysis that you cited here in regard to job.
The goals of this administration are obvious. We can see clearly who they want to target, who they want to scapegoat, and who they want to make afraid. And it must be called out by us directly and without hesitation. Now is not the time to let the media rewrite history or sanitize the kind of rhetoric Charlie Kirk promoted on college campuses. The way someone passes does not erase the harmful way they lived or the millions of dollars made by spreading divisive and inflammatory content. We cannot allow that narrative to be reframed as simple free speech when it was, in reality, a business model built on outrage and discrimination. Meanwhile, this administration is using tragedy as a political shield to avoid real solutions that would actually keep children and communities safe. I refuse to accept that. I will continue to push back against that. And if you want to stand with me and be part of this fight, you can join this channel. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a blue heart in the comments to show your support.